there might be something wrong with us, because every time we come across one of these beautiful, idyllic landscapes, we tend to make a mess of it. Taurox and the Bloodbrute Behemoth are gearing up to paint the town red, not the coast of Lyon. The Beastmen will show us how to venerate KHORNE. Dark Elves, for their part, know a thing or two about it, and when the bloody-handed god turns his attention towards Bretonnia, you know we'll be in for a show. Cain and KHORNE, two sides of the same coin, both gods of murder, both bringing the pain train for the Slaughterhorn tribe. Taurox the Brass Bull is leading a death ball of Minotaurs and the Bloodbrute Behemoth Ghorgon. Absolutely ridiculous damage output split amongst those three units, but Dark Shard or Scourge Runner fire could put the hurt on them, so keeping them safe, well, it's hard to when you have to throw them into melee, but there is a balance to be struck there, and it's not always easy to determine where that line is. Best way to nullify their output is simply to throw chaff in their way and stuff them up. Don't give them anything important or expensive to kill. But man, when they get on the right target, they are going to rip it up in seconds, so be careful if you see a Ghorgon stomping your way. Rest of the Brayherd is a horde of Ungors, archers, spearmen, raiders, the works. Few Centaurs and no mage, because duh, it's KHORNE. Blood God does not suffer the Psyker to live. And on the Dark Elf side, 3 Vanguard deployed Dark Riders, host of Dread Spears, Bleak Swords, and Dark Shards, moving down the hilltop. Unit of Black Guard, led by their lord Malekith the Witch King, astride Seraphon the Black Dragon. Malekith has seen a resurgence since Immortal Empires, powerful melee character with good casting capabilities as well, and his Terror and Soul Stealers can be invaluable against Beastmen, tend to have to blob up to surround and kill him. Now the Blades of the Blood Queen are a bit of a risky pick, but if 2 or 3 Bestigors hit the field, they could be brutal against that heavy infantry. Won't be the case here, but they can still dispatch fodder quite efficiently, or they might get run over by Minotaurs. We'll see. Some Vanguard deployed stuff in the rear, Centaurs and Poison Warhounds to maybe sneak up on some unsuspecting Dark Shards when the opportunity presents itself. And generally, I'd say a mobility game from the Dark Elves is closer to the meta against Beastmen than what we see here. Something like 4 Scourge Runners, Dark Rider crossbows, a lot of cav, spread the field, skirmish them up and down. Basically, you could go full kite, and that's what I'd see probably in a tournament scenario. But really, there's a lot of way for both these factions to approach this particular matchup, and in this one, there will be a lot of fodder infantry. Now, Soul Stealer at the start, typically you'll only see that after Malekith has landed, or at least once battle is joined, because that way he can make use of the healing element. But if you can catch Taurox and his Minibus in the spell radius, that's probably worth it at the beginning. He isn't Morathi, he can't cast Soul Stealer quite as much as her, I don't believe, but he can still put quite a few down through the course of a battle, and 500 value on the most important enemy troops right off the bat is certainly not too bad. Important thing to remember, though, is that the Ghorgon has a lot of chaff to feast on for strength from flesh regen, so even if you deal some damage to him with Soul Stealer, he will probably be able to regenerate that back to full. Now, with the infantry fight, expect Bleak Swords to run through raiders pretty quickly. They're a very good chaff infantry unit right now, and with Seraphon landing in their flank and rear, it's going to get even worse for the Beastmen. So expect their infantry to crumble pretty quickly. But what's interesting here is that the Beastmen have some options in how they want to approach dealing with Seraphon. They could kind of ignore him, because nothing in their back line is incredibly important. Obviously, they like to keep their Ungor Raiders online for as long as possible, because 3 of those folks firing on anything can do a lot of damage. But right now, Taurox, the Bloodbrute Behemoth, and the Minotaurs are over on the other side of the battlefield. So they might look to trade, and I'd say the Dark Elves have invested more in their range capabilities with those Dark Shards. Certainly a more dangerous unit than Ungor Raiders. So it might be a good opportunity for the Beastmen to overload this flank and push into the rear, shut down those armor-piercing crossbows. And if you're looking at pure infantry killing potential, then a Jabber Scythe would probably be a better choice than the Ghorgon. But the nice thing about having that here is that you now have a trump card if Malekith decides to land and fight. Because the Ghorgon is going to beat the brakes off of Seraphon in a 1v1, and that's not even counting Taurox the Brass Bull and Minotaurs pinning him in place and hitting him with their absurd weapon strength. Centaurs are moving up the center into the Dark Shards. There are some openings on both sides, really, for the big monsters and fast movers to get in and start causing havoc. Brass Bull is into the rear, but Black Guard and the Blades of the Blood Queen are sprinting over to reinforce, while the Vanguard ambush has been foiled and stuffed by a contingent of Dark Riders near the summit of that hill. Nicely played from the Dark Elves there. It's important to shut down those Poison Warhounds and Centaurs because it's the easiest way the Beastmen have for killing off all those AP crossbows. Chill Wind from the Witch King, freezing some archers' tatas off. Gaze of Malice in there too, while the dragon continues to munch and crunch in the rear. But Centaurs have come back to support. Though that's not the great weapon variant, they could not hope to kill Malekith. They could certainly tie him up for a while and perhaps prevent him from taking off and lining up some of those nasty breath attacks. Really interesting approach from both players here, essentially avoiding each other's major threats and instead focusing on clearing out all the range troops and fodder first. And Minotaurs and the Bloodbrute Behemoth probably going to do that a little bit more efficiently than a Black Dragon, unless he can get some breath attacks in, and we haven't seen any of those noxious breaths so far. Still, he's doing a great job of shutting down the Ungor Archer play. Centaurs in and amongst the Dark Shards and preventing them from firing into Taurox from point-blank range, which would have been rather painful for the heavily armored Brute of KHORNE, and his rune-tortured axes will go to work here and expect to see quite a bit of crimson spewing everywhere as the Beastmen feast on the rear. As a comment in one of my previous videos said, must be some of those Gen Z Brayherds. They love munching on the booty. A lot of routing on both sides. Ungor Archers breaking towards the edges of the map. I don't imagine the Dark Shards will be around for too much longer. Taurox is fine to fight Dread Spears all day long. They simply do not have enough armor piercing to get through his brass body. But the Bloodbrute Behemoth and the Minotaurs want no business with those Blackguard of Nagaron, so they will retreat and look to take out this isolated wing of infantry closer to the Beastmen deployment. Dark Riders breaking off as Taurox makes contact. Centaurs actually managed to deal with the Dark Riders quite effectively. Even though they got countercharged, they still have half their HP remaining, and that could be a big issue for the Dark Elves because they've already had a hard time keeping their range play online and firing. This is just brutal for the Dark Elves over on this side. I guess it's not technically cannibalism if the Beastmen are eating a bunch of knife ears, but man, it feels awfully close. And now we enter the second stage of the battle, and I've said it many times in the past, but these are some of my favorite kinds of replays when both armies have the opportunity to reset, reform the lines, and go back in for a second round. Both players using their speed to ensure that anything that already broke off from the main force is run down and not allowed to return. If Ungor Raiders manage to return and fire in from a vanguard or ambush position, well, if Malekith was pinned down, they could take his HP quite quickly. A few Ungor just tossed about 75 feet into the air. Always fun. And here we go, getting ready for round number 2. Taurox the Brass Bull, very healthy. Bloodbrute Behemoth, even more so because of his strength from flesh. Every time he closes into melee, he's getting regeneration. Very important, especially when you're faced with this much fodder. Essentially means any time the Ghorgon takes a bunch of damage, he can retreat, go back in, kill some Dread Spears, kill some Bleach Swords, and get himself back to full HP. Minotaurs and Taurox would be quite wise to stay out of the range of those remaining Dark Shards, but I think the Druki have lost the majority of their ranged firepower, which could be a problem when faced with a monster like the Bloodbrute Behemoth. It's usually one of the best ways to kill a large single entity monster like that one, but it also only has 50 armor. So Blackguard of Nagaron and Malekith together could definitely do a number on him if they have some support from the rest of their infantry. That's something that the Dark Elves are not lacking. They have tons of foot troops here, but not if the minibus has anything to say about it. Here comes the stampede, the avalanche of brazen brutality. Centaurs managed to skirt around the side and into the Dark Shards. Shan't be seeing them again, but that might be true for both units because Seraphon will land in amongst Centaurs who might just be able to squeegee their way past and survive. The remaining Dark Riders were ridden down by the Centaurs over on this side, who are also looking quite healthy, but now they're faced with their toughest challenge yet. They have to commit against the Blackguard of Nagaron before they lose the rest of their infantry, and if Malekith has anything to say about this, there won't be many Brayherd infantry units remaining once he goes in. Now, this is dangerous, but this is exactly how you want to use Soul Stealer. Basically force that blob, go in, cause the terror bomb, but Malekith might have carried himself a little bit too far into the fight because now he's fully surrounded by Minotaurs, by the Bloodbrute Behemoth, and by Taurox the Brass Bull, and that is a lot of heavy hitters. Now, Soul Stealer will get him a large percentage of his HP back, but if he pulls through on this side, he'll be faced with Centaurs. That's a lot of mass and a lot of things preventing him from escaping while he's attacked in the flank and rear. The rest of the Brayherd is routing off. Dark Elves are certainly winning everywhere else, but if they lose their Lord in this scenario, it could be the death knell for the Druchii. He's through. It looks like he's on his way towards escape. If he can just take off into the sky, he should be fine. That's one thing the Beastmen are amazing at doing, preventing aerial troops from ever taking off again. Centaurs are so fast. Minotaurs, Taurox, and, well, no, actually the Minotaurs had to be left in. They were sacrificed on the altar of KHORNE. They took down as many infantry as they possibly could, but they are breaking off and have only a few remaining models. But Malekith has lost his opportunity. It was a good idea to try to run them through the Dread Spears to give him a little bit more space to escape. But the Centaurs, Taurox, and the Ghorgon just ran through those Dread Spears like they weren't even there. And now with a few more attacks from those Scything Blades, Seraphon will not take off, and they are about to lose their Eternity King. Huge loss for the Dark Elves here. And frankly, I think he probably should not have pulled through and instead gone back the way he came in. I think he would have been able to escape if he had done that. And I think some people are going to be like, wow, that was so stupid to throw him in where the Ghorgon and Taurox is, but that is how you win this fight, right? The only way you're going to kill that Ghorgon is if Malekith commits. The Black Guard by themselves aren't going to do it. You need that Black Dragon to start hitting stuff too. Problem was, he just had an animation that carried him deep into the Brayherd, and that allowed him to get picked off pretty easily. With the death of Malekith, the balance bar is heavily in favor of the Beastmen, but they have a ton of infantry remaining and almost full HP on the Blades of the Blood Queen, which, to be fair, not a unit you typically want to have to engage Taurox and a Ghorgon, but certainly have enough punching power to do a lot of damage to them in the right scenario. I'm really curious to see how elite foot troops do without support from their lord. The Minotaurs came back, Taurox charging in from one side, while the Minibus charges in from the other. And the Blades of the Blood Queen are very quickly losing their HP and their leadership. And this is looking like it might just be army losses. This is just turning into utter brutality. Complete carnage in veneration of KHORNE, the Blood God. And I don't know, I think this is actually going to be a little bit embarrassing for the remaining Dark Elf troops. I think that they should have put up a stiffer resistance than the one they just did. I get that Malekith just died. I get that they had that leadership penalty associated with it. But Black Guard are immune to psychology. They still had quite a few models remaining. They had almost full HP on the Blades of the Blood Queen and a lot of spears and bleak swords remaining. And they did nothing. They got terror bombed and just swept from the field almost instantaneously. They got touched and died. So yes, I would certainly expect Taurox and a Ghorgon to perform pretty well in that scenario. I mean, the BLOODBRUTE Behemoth has 80 plus melee attack. It's a terrifying force. But I would have liked infantry to perform better there than they did. I guess it was just too many leadership penalties all at once, especially with the Centaur charging in from behind. Now, Malekith himself had a good performance. 262 kills, 2,000 damage value. Didn't quite pay for himself, but relatively close anyway. Had some good Soul Stealers. Obviously, we all know what the blunder was there. When he charged in, had an attack animation carry himself too far forward, and then instead of retreating back the way he came, he compounded the mistake by trying to pull through and into the teeth of some extra Centaurs and just took a bunch of damage there that he probably could have avoided. A couple Soul Stealers in those endgame blobs could have easily turned the fight in the Dark Elves' favor, but the fact that they weren't able to keep their Dark Shards online made it a pretty difficult situation for dealing with the BLOODBRUTE Behemoth, which kind of just had its pick of the litter in terms of engagements. And when it came down to it, Malekith can't take that Ghorgon in a 1v1, and definitely not in a 1v2 against Taurox the Brass Bull.